Let's talk, though, now to Liat Collins, editor of the international Jerusalem Post, because the ceasefire is due to kick in properly on Sunday. There's an awful lot of tenuous hope that basically it will work, that the hostages will all be released, but there's still plenty of people who wonder whether it is all sounding a little bit too good to be true. Liat, very good morning to you.
Good morning to you too.
Thank you very much for joining us. What's the feeling where you are? What's the mood where you are? Obviously, a lot of people very, very joyous last night, but with some time to think about it, you know, is there a lot of crossed fingers?
I think, first of all, the focus here is more on the release of the hostages rather than the ceasefire. We've been through this before. Yes, we really need to know the details of who's coming home, who's still alive. It's absolutely unfathomable that Hamas hasn't even told us all these 15 months who's alive, who's dead. I mean, it's part of the psychological warfare.
Yeah.
So, yes, there's tension. And I don't think there's so much optimism in the sense of this is the end. I think we've been through this before, and if it's not carried out correctly, we'll be through this again.
Yes, because all through this this negotiation process, I mean, Benjamin Netanyahu has been very clear that we must never allow Hamas to have the opportunity to do again what they did on October the 7th, 2023.
Indeed, and I think the point needs to be made that this isn't just a matter of Hamas and Israel. This is a threat that's facing the entire West. If invaders came in and rampaged through communities in a sovereign state, burning, killing, pillaging, raping, and abducting. If that can happen in Israel, it can happen elsewhere in the West.
Yes. And in terms of the release of the hostages, it's always been fraught with difficulty, hasn't it? Because Hamas always demands the release of Palestinian prisoners, and apparently Netanyahu this morning has given a statement that he's objecting to part of the agreement which would give, or rather Hamas are objecting to part of the agreement which would give Israel the ability to veto the release of certain Palestinian prisoners.
Well, in effect, it feels a little bit like Hamas is getting a prize here. They came in, killed 1,200 people and abducted 250. And now they're going to be rewarded with the release of terrorists with blood on their hands, and they get to demand who is the people that gets released in return. And I don't think that this is going to be a good sign of the long term, because it's just going to encourage more hostage abductions.
Well, that's right. And, I mean, one of the Hamas leaders that was killed in recent months was one of those released some years earlier, wasn't he? And so, obviously, the Israelis are going to be a bit careful about who they release, because if what happened last time happens again, it means you're basically releasing somebody so that they can attack you.
Indeed, and it should be noted that he also had brain surgery while he was in an Israeli prison. He had growth removed.
Yeah.
So he was treated, his life was saved twice, really,
right,
by the Israelis, and then he went on to mastermind this atrocity, a mega atrocity.
Yeah, absolutely right. And I mean, so what is the number, as far as you believe it to be, of the hostages that you hope will be released, and how many of them do you know are actually still alive?
I don't have the exact figures. Obviously, I hope that all of them are released. It seems that there's 98 hostages. Maybe half of them are alive, but I don't have the exact figures on that. But I think it also needs, the point of bringing people home for burial also can't be underestimated. We need the closure. The families need closure. It's just terrible to think of these people having been taken from their homes. I mean, these are ordinary people on a Saturday morning. You know, the Beavis baby, you know, one still in diapers, being dragged from his home, and so even the dead must come home. They must get a decent burial at home.
Yeah, absolutely right. Hamas have basically been completely denuded, by and large, though, in terms of their operational capability. There was still some military attacks coming in from Israel to Gaza last night. I mean, obviously, is there a fear that leading up to the deadline that there might be some sort of last gasp attacks, if you like, coming from Gaza?
For sure, that's a fear. And also, even in the past, we've seen after a ceasefire went into effect, the UN-sponsored ceasefire went into effect, that 2 soldiers were abducted, killed and abducted. Their bodies are still being held, and their bodies are actually part of this deal. So, and that was after a ceasefire went into effect. So, obviously, I mean, it's a terrorist organization. We're not going to trust them.
Right. And that is the trouble, isn't it? I mean, you can't trust them. I mean, and what role do you think Netanyahu would wish for example, the Trump administration to have in trying to keep the peace, if you like, and trying to, because Israel has often said that if they're going to allow the ceasefire to go ahead, there'll have to be some kind of proper buffer zone between Gaza and Israel.
That's an important point. I don't think it's just up to Trump. I think, again, it has to be an international effort. I think it's extraordinary that the Red Cross is now coming in to help with the transfer of the rescued or released hostages when it hasn't even visited them. 15 months, it hasn't visited the hostages. It hasn't gotten them medication and aid. It hasn't given us a list of who's alive and who's dead. They don't need to be a glorified taxi service. This is the International Red Cross.
Right.
They should be active up till now. And the same with the United Nations and the UNRWA facilities, the hospitals and the schools there that were being used as terror bases and that had terror tunnels underneath them. The hospitals were being used openly as terror bases.
And these are
international bodies. These are international bodies. It's not a matter of Trump who will come in for 4 years. The world needs to make this switch.
Right. And have you been surprised, and have people in Israel been surprised at the way that many people in the West and many people in organisations like the Red Cross have kind of sided with the Palestinians here unilaterally? And it's been quite obvious. I mean, I'm talking about The Guardian here this morning. You know, they've got a picture of people celebrating in Tel Aviv, in Gaza on the front page, but nobody celebrating in Israel. And I know it's a small thing, but it just, to me, it sort of signals what the problem is in the West, where people would rather side with, you know, these ghastly terrorists than they would with a democratic state with an elected, Prime Minister.
I don't think people were surprised. I think people were surprised at the extent of it and the incredible wave of anti-Semitic attacks that we've seen, violent anti-Semitic attacks we've seen around the world, also on campuses and in neighborhoods, attacks on synagogues, attacks on individuals. I think the depth of that and extent of that in places like Canada and Australia did come as a shock. I don't think people thought that would be happening. Unfortunately, we've seen in the past also that the Palestinians are very good at PR, and they have turned themselves into the victims, even when they've committed the massacre.
Yeah, incredible. I mean, we've got another protest on Saturday from the Palestinian Alliance, or whatever it's called here. Nobody knows whether they're going to be out celebrating or whether they're going to continue with their call for an end to Israel's existence. You know, it almost feels like it will never end, that kind of stuff.
It does need an international approach to end it. When you're saying a globalized intifada, when that's one of the slogans, think what that means.
Yeah.
That means bringing ISIS-type tactics to your countries and to your cities. And unfortunately, we see that it happens. And people haven't managed to understand that is connected, that there's a line that joins terrorism against Israel and terrorism elsewhere.
Yeah, absolutely right. Well, Liat, listen, let's hope it all works out well, and let's hope the hostages come back safe, as many of them as we can find. That's great. Brilliant to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Liat Collins, there, editor of the international Jerusalem Post. And she makes a very good point, you know. It's not just about the Middle East, this. It's all about international terrorism. Think about all of the atrocities that have been committed by Muslim fundamentalist groups, Islamic fundamentalists in the West, whether it's in Germany, whether it's in Bali, whether it's in the United States of America, whether it's here, whether it's in France. You know, it all is being carried out by people who have sympathy with Hamas and Hezbollah and the Iranian regimes and an anti-Israeli kind of precept. It's as simple as that. You might as well admit it, and it needs to stop. And hopefully Donald Trump will make it stop.